Pariyatti Audiobooks presents Chapter 6, Why the Buddha Sat Under a Tree, from Journey of Insight Meditation by Lerner, as read by Jonathan Nelson.
Chapter 6, Why the Buddha Sat Under a Tree. Immediately after Hover's departure, I had begun another retreat, and on New Year's Day, Goenka's chanting brought to an end 40 continuous days of meditation behind walls for me. An hour after the meditation ended, my monastic woolen shawl and white cotton pajama suit were tucked away in my bag, and I marveled at the strange feeling of denim against my skin once again. "Ready, my boy?" Travis finally asked when the uproarious and insistent conversation at lunch seemed to have finally petered out. 100 people were talking at once, and at the same time listening in mild bewilderment to the strange sound of their own voices. There wasn't much to say, that was soon obvious. Yet we all went on talking, as if unwilling to face that conclusion. "All we've got to do," Travis said, as if reminding himself as we walked away from the crowd, "is remember what Goenka told us. The real test is out there. That's how we find out whether we've made any progress with this." I was confident. I was high. There was no doubt about it. That morning, at the final session of Metta, I had felt my love for the whole universe expand out of that room and go on forever. Whatever came next didn't seem to matter. "Rickshaw! Hey, Walla!" I called exuberantly to a driver of a 3-wheeled, pedaled taxi as we stepped out through the little metal gate onto the street for the first time. A small, leathery, aged-looking man, although perhaps not much older than I, braked to a halt in front of us and sat on his bicycle seat, mopping his brow with the rag that soon hung over one shoulder. Travis climbed on first, and I got in after, telling the man where we wanted to go. 5 rupees, he said, still wiping his sweat away. "Don't be silly," I replied with a nervous laugh. "It's 3 from here." 5 rupees. He didn't turn around. I could see his back through the holes in his shirt. His muscled legs dangled beside the pedals. I started to climb out, looking for another rickshaw, but my eyes couldn't seem to focus. Then, all of a sudden, I saw where I was. A blur of colored cloth, frantically struggling bodies, lurching machines, and obstinate animals dizzied me. I couldn't locate the street, and the gateway to the Burmese Vihara looked like a keyhole. I would pay him 10 rupees to get us out of there, because I certainly couldn't move. My body felt like a sack of flour. Travis was yelling at him in broken Hindi. The man shouted back that we had plenty of money. He had none, so we could give him 5 rupees. Of course, this was true, but so was it true that the ride cost 3 rupees. The paradox nearly split my mind. I couldn't make distinctions like that. My eyes started to bulge. I had literally forgotten what to do. I had to do something. The rickshaw still wasn't moving. I couldn't close my eyes and watch my breath. "Goenka, Hover, what should I do?" "Travis," I croaked. "I'll pay him 5 rupees. Travis shook his head. "Forget it. Buying your way out doesn't pass the test either." So we went for 3, but paid dearly since the man's anger was unbearable, numbing Travis and me into silence for the whole ride. The rest of the day went no better. It felt like I was stumbling around in someone else's dream. Choosing one size envelope over another at the post office was excruciating after weeks in which the greatest choice presented to me was between an orange and a banana for tea. And by a very simple process of alternation, I'd long ago eliminated that confrontation. The problem was more than choice. There was something indefinable in the air all around me, and as I sniffed it in bewilderment, it nearly knocked me out. Everything was moving strangely. We got out of our rickshaw right in the heart of the city, down near the Ganges River, the holiest spot in the world to Hindus, the place where they come to die. Here, the banks of the river are lined with funeral pyres on the ghats, the steps leading to the river, creating an amazing festival of burning corpses. Holy men are as prevalent as street vendors. Behind the ghats are the narrow, winding side streets of the bazaar, packed with silk and brass merchants, tea stalls, and restaurants. As we wandered through this amazing scene of living, selling, and dying, I felt as ineffectual as a pincushion. Every rude sound, every jostling body, every puzzling sight stuck in me. I had no mechanism left for comprehension. Oh, I know what that is. Or even for dismissal of the unpleasant. I was gaping at everything. I was helplessly aware. I couldn't be more removed from everything around me, but it was hardly a safe distance. I felt as if I would have to shout to be heard, to catch anyone's attention, to get anything done, and I didn't feel like shouting. I wanted to crawl into a hole. It wasn't intellectual revulsion. I had no sense of, boy, what a foolish way to live. They should know what I know. Nothing looked familiar enough to judge. The impressions just kept floating through my head and spewing out like confetti. I felt like an interplanetary visitor, desperate to get back to his spaceship for a fix of canned air. Travis and I stepped back onto the Vihara grounds at dusk, and an involuntary sigh shook us both. A minute later, we were back in our tent, munching a banana that tasted infinitely better than all the afternoon's restaurant food, which I'd spent 40 days dreaming about. I looked at Travis's ashen face. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled slightly. I was sure I looked worse. "My boy," he finally said, "I guess this is what is called blown out." "I don't understand it." He shook his head angrily. "Goenka calls this an art of living? 40 days to develop equanimity, and I was ready to kill that rickshaw driver." "Which one?" "I don't know, all of them." The tent felt like it was going to explode. "I'm in great shape, and in 12 days I've got to be back in Canada. This is ridiculous. Look at me. I can't even walk out on the streets. When you met me, I had a suntan, a healthy smile, and I loved meditating. Now I'm a basket case." Perhaps self-protectively, I had ignored that transformation. He had experienced nothing as dramatic as my knots and fever. Just a very insistent and painful process of confronting himself each hour, each day, carefully peeling back the layers of defense, and tearing them free when they stuck. "I don't recognize what's left of me," he said with a little bitterness. "What blows me away out there is not what I'm watching." He groped for words. "I'm not there. I'm out to lunch. My body's not there, and neither is my mind. I'm scattered all over the place." "So what are you going to do now?" "Another course, quick, and I hope I can put it all together before I have to get on the plane." We were both silent. His decision to go on Goenka's next retreat immediately meant that we'd part ways the day after next. I had hoped we could hang out together for a while before I left on my trip to Burma. It was very strange just then to think that I'd be going on alone. I kept thinking that somehow Travis would materialize the money to come with me. I had forgotten by now what it was like not to be around him. It had been a hard choice for me. Up until a week ago, our tentative plan had been for him to forget about the return portion of his excursion ticket back to Canada, and to head down to Ceylon together on what money I had left. Then, one day, as I was sunning myself after lunch, I overheard a nearby conversation about a few people planning a trip to the International Meditation Center in Rangoon. I had spoken to some of those who had gone there in the fall with Hover, and though they really had little to say about their visit, there was something similar about all of them. A look in their eyes, as if they had seen something no one else had. Now, apparently, there was a special occasion coming up at the center, a memorial course commemorating the demise of U Ba Khin, the teacher of my teachers, which would be attended by all of his Burmese disciples. They were allowing some Western visitors to attend, and I didn't know how, but I knew I would be one of them. Something about the sound of the place, maybe just the name, rung the same bell that went off the first time I'd heard Vipassana meditation on the phone. Once again, the decision was made, leaving only the details. The hardest part was telling Travis. We had been keeping silence since Goenka's retreat, which began immediately following Hover's departure. Now I walked back into the tent and found him stretched out, sleeping or meditating, I wasn't sure. I was tempted to walk out. I knew that this was really going to interrupt things, but I couldn't sit with it for the next week. "Well," he said, opening his eyes. "It looks like I'm on that trip to Burma." He smiled. "I figured you would be." "Really?" I answered in the tone of mock surprise I'd adopted from him. "Sure, it seemed logical." "And what about you?" He exhaled and closed his eyes. "I don't want to think about it." A short pause. Then, "How much would it cost for me to go?" For a moment, it was a wonderful possibility. The guy who had financed Travis's trip to India from the States was part of the contingent to Burma. We wondered if he could be persuaded. Over $1,000, including a new ticket back to Canada. Travis shrugged. Too much to even ask. Now, a week later, as we sat in the darkness of our tent, that decision was a little harder to live with. Travis got up and lit the candle, filling our space with a warm, comforting glow. I realized how much we had been able to take for granted together over these past weeks. I had never lived so easily with anyone before. It only now occurred to me that, despite the ego-wrenching experience we had both been through, and a physical proximity where there could be no masking, no hiding, I couldn't recall even a moment of hostility or resentment passing between us. Instead, there was cooperation and understanding. We wordlessly shared our food and cleaned each other's dishes. I had felt no competition with Travis, ever. Going through that same fire together had formed a bond of love and understanding. We were silent the next morning during our ride to the train station and during most of the train ride to the city of Gaia. From there, Travis would take a bus to the site of Goenka's next course a few hours away, while I rode by rickshaw a few miles to nearby Bodh Gaya, the site of the Buddha's enlightenment, and now a place of pilgrimage for Buddhists. I couldn't think about my stay there, nor my upcoming trip to Burma. My mind was stuck in a groove of dread over the sundering of our partnership. I couldn't even imagine this as anything but a joint venture. And Travis looked terrible. I probably did too, but he was the one I could see. Traveling all morning was just an extension of the previous day. It seemed almost dangerous that we should wander off separately now. We embraced each other with pats on the back when it was time to go. "My boy," he said, "I have nothing to say." I nodded. "Be happy." "Yeah," he muttered. "I forgot about that." And then I did what I was most afraid to do. I turned and walked out of the train station alone. And then there was a rickshaw, and I was watching the incredible straining of those legs, this man's only commodity in life, drawing me through crowded city streets. I felt his momentary disappointment at each intersection where he had to stop, relinquish his momentum, and begin all over the struggle to get his burden rolling. The air was full of the sweet, musky odor of Indian cigarettes, mingled with rancid frying oil, cow dung, and human sweat. Something was missing, though. My loneliness. Where was it? My friend, the driver, was chattering happily. In broken English, he pointed out the sights. We'd left the outskirts of the city and were rolling along a flat, tree-lined road. The sun was high and the air was warm. It would be nice if Travis were... The thought died. A gentle breeze. Maybe the motion of the pedicab whiffed away. I reached for it. It was gone. He was gone, and had taken loneliness with him. In a moment, my mind was trapped in guilt. I should miss him. He was my friend. And then there was an eerie sensation of trying to recall what he looked like, and I couldn't. The bumps in the road clamored for my attention, and the crowds along the road as well. They were Tibetans, refugees living now in India, assembled here in this tiny shrine town to see their Pope, the Dalai Lama. Esoteric Buddhist teachings. A sacred initiation called a Wong was being staged here this week. A momentous occasion called the Kali Chakra Wong. I rolled these wonderful words around my tongue. Travis wanted to catch it. I tried to hold on to that thought. Loneliness would even be comforting now. Familiar in the face of this strange, unrecognizable feeling of floating adrift in the present. Tents and encampments lined the road, campfires everywhere. 70,000 pilgrims, descendants of an ancient Buddhist tradition with a flavor of mystic mountains. The teaching blended with the culture it finds. Prayer beads clicking and mantra chanting rumbled in the air. I was giddy, staring at processions of robed priests in strange headgear, some with high peaks and others with duck-billed brims. Women with thick black braids and strings of turquoise and coral the size of pigeons' eggs hanging from their necks. Strange, rugged, placid faces reminded me of American Indian tribes. A unique vibration from them all, unlike any people I'd ever seen. I caught myself melting into it, a little guilty on my day of mourning, a little uneasy at how easy it was. We stopped at the gateway to a walled enclosure, another Burmese Buddhist vihara. Inside, it was familiarly austere compared with the carnival in the streets. I recognized many faces. I marched through a swirl of details, arranging my accommodations for the next few days, discussing plans for the trip to Burma with my fellow travelers. And then I was alone again, lying on a wide open grassy lawn. Was I numb? Was that it? Was that why I didn't feel anything? All I felt was the weight of my chest rising and falling with each breath. My memory was gone, that was all. And then I realized that this was the way it was supposed to be. This was what I'd been taught. It was as if, after so many hours of staring with rooted attention at this moment, now, this pain, my mind had gotten locked into that position, unable to move from side to side, forward or back. And here I was, stuck, gaping at the present, unable to remember, unable to plan. The next day, the streets were quieter. It was early morning. Bill, a friend from Benares, seemed to know just what was going on with my mind and body, so he held my hand, as it were, with a soothing string of not too meaningful conversation that had the effect of lulling me into a sense of familiarity. The Bodhi temple lay down a hill beneath the road. As we walked toward it, the hum of energy in the air increased in pitch. I could feel it. Bill explained that a few years before he had been deeply involved with Tibetan practice. At that time, it was the only form of Buddhism in India. To me, its external trappings, visual symbolism, and ritual activity were entirely antithetical to the Buddha's simple teaching of the end of suffering through knowing reality. I looked at the elaborately carved medieval prismatic shape of the temple. I saw only a pile of rock. Everywhere, devotees were bowing down full length on the ground over and over and over, as if doing calisthenics for football practice. Do they see Buddha as some sort of god? I asked Bill. I suppose that on the popular level they do, and that's where most people's practice is. But, it's no different in Burma or any of the other countries where Theravada, the supposedly pure teaching of Buddha, is practiced. The real Tibetan teaching isn't worship at all, though. Even though they do the same prostrations and mantras, to those who are serious, it means something very different. Just another way of confronting the ego. I would have argued the point, but we were at the temple now, and the swirl of activity forced me to watch each step I made. I stopped and stared at a very old Tibetan man rhythmically bowing, kneeling, then fully prostrating before a statue of the Buddha. What did he want? What did he expect? It was confusing to me. It confronted some growing inner sense of mine of what this end of suffering was really all about. Not statues, not chanting. There's nothing out there. I felt like shouting it. Inside. I wanted to turn around and head back to the peace of the vihara. Instead, Bill led me by the arm around the temple, under strings of colored cloth prayer flags, through the whirring of the little prayer wheels, the revolving metal drums on sticks that the Tibetans carry. He pointed to a tree surrounded by a heavy, carved stone railing and a curious mixture of reverent pilgrims and gawking sightseers. We stood off to the side. I wondered if I was supposed to say anything. Nice tree. Big deal. Its bark was dry and blotchy, its limbs kind of droopy, like an old retired man whiling away his empty time on a park bench. I was ready to leave. Instead, we sat down on a flat stone surface in a corner of the courtyard. I noticed after a moment that Bill's eyes were closed and his hands folded loosely in his lap. I did the same. Almost immediately, that newfound sensor, which for lack of better understanding I referred to as my body, came alive. I felt a surge of power flowing through me. My back straightened up, and my head and shoulders pulled into line. I felt my chest drawn forward in the direction of that tree. An enormous calm enveloped me. All the noise and humming and activity receded to a faint background whisper. I intuitively felt some inkling, some tiny hint of what had transpired in this spot 25 centuries ago was still going on right now. My mind rushed first for explanation, then for phrases of description like vibrations and sanctified ground. But the words were babbling. I relaxed into awe. Place and time lost their meaning. Where I was experiencing this and when had no relevance. My body told me it was so. It told me that the world can whir and hum and crank on with its noisy business, and yet the stillness is there. The peace is within. Prostrations and chanting and supplication and prayer clogged the air, and yet that cool, empty space beneath that tree remained untouched. The Buddha still sat there, as he did 2,500 years ago, with eyes closed and attention turned inward. And even though he was alone then, in silence, still the outside world confronted him. His own desires for that world, his senses, and the machinery of his mind assaulted him with 1,000 prostrations and supplications and prayers for his attention. And he continued to turn inward, deeper and deeper within. I was just on the edge, the most distant approach to that space within, standing before an unknown universe of infinite possibility. To go further, I could carry nothing with me, no baggage of the outer world. These past weeks had been a reluctant, painful process of giving up that baggage. But I'd done it, and so forfeited my right to travel out there. I would be blown out if I tried. That kind of tourism was dead for me. We seemed to open our eyes together. I shook my head slowly in amazement. Few words came out. As my mind started rolling again, though, it wanted to know, how? What had I felt? Where had I been? Bill shrugged. This is a pretty amazing place. Actually, the whole town is like this usually, but now you can hardly notice it underneath all of this activity. Then he smiled. Wait until you go to the meditation center in Rangoon. That's a pretty amazing space too. The meditation cells where U Ba Khin taught, it reminds me of this place.
Pariyatti, a nonprofit 501c3 organization, offers a wide variety of books, eBooks, videos, and audiobooks about the teachings of the Buddha, the Pāli language, and Vipassana meditation. Browse our complete catalog at www.pariyatti.org.